The old man didn't move. He stood perfectly still in the middle of the parking lot, a thin stream of blood trailing down from his temple. 3 younger men had surrounded him. Cocky grins stretched across their faces, completely unaware they'd just made the most disastrous mistake of their lives. Because the figure they thought was some defenseless senior wasn't just any old man. It was Chuck Norris. Before we dive in, drop your location in the comments, and if stories like this pull you in, don't forget to subscribe. It was a typical Saturday morning, or at least... Sunlight poured across the farmer's market parking lot in golden streaks, filtering through maple branches and scattering light across the pavement like confetti. The April air was brisk, fragrant with blooming flowers and sun-warmed fruit. Chatter drifted lazily among the crowd, mingling with the soft hum of folk music from a speaker no one could quite see. Gina Norris moved gracefully between parked cars, a vision of timeless elegance with silver-streaked hair and eyes that carried decades of quiet wisdom. At her side swung a faded canvas tote bag, worn but sturdy, its weathered fabric whispering of 30 years of tradition. Every Saturday morning without fail, she carried that bag to this very market. Inside it today, carrots with their green tops still attached, a crusty loaf of sourdough, and a small basket of glistening strawberries. Chuck's favorite. She hummed as she walked, already planning tomorrow's breakfast. Across the lot, Chuck watched her from where he leaned against their sedan, black coffee in hand. At 70, his frame was still imposing. Straight-backed, sharp-eyed, the calm center of any storm. The way he looked at her, even now after 50 years, has said everything. She was still the reason the world made sense. Chuck caught the glint of light in her hair, the way she paused to compliment a vendor, how she gently inspected each item before placing it in the bag. Little things most people would miss. Not Chuck. Not ever. Gina reached a display of Honeycrisp apples and added a few to her tote, stretching the fabric just a bit more. She always bought extra. She said it was for the neighbors, but Chuck knew it was just who she was. Soft-spoken, generous, and kind to a fault. It was a perfect morning. The kind of morning that made life feel worth fighting for. Chuck closed his eyes for half a second and breathed in the peace. And just like that, it was gone. A deep, rumbling engine snarled in the distance. Chuck opened his eyes. A black SUV screeched into the lot, its tinted windows hiding the faces inside. Bass-heavy music thumped through the frame so hard it rattled nearby windshields. The vehicle didn't follow lanes. It cut across them, barely missing a young mother with a stroller. Chuck's coffee paused at his lips. His eyes locked onto the SUV. Something in his gut, something ancient and trained, told him, set the cup down, so he did. It had been 15 years since his last fight, but the moment he saw the SUV come to a crooked stop, doors flinging open, Chuck knew that streak might just end today. 3 men stepped out in sync. Mid-20s, flashy clothes, faces that told the world they thought it owed them something. The driver, tall, lean, and inked from neck to jawline, slammed his door and adjusted his designer sunglasses like he was preparing for a photo shoot. His crew followed, one broad-shouldered and bald, the other wiry with a permanent smirk. They moved like they owned the ground beneath them. Their arrival shifted the atmosphere. Shoppers pulled children closer. Elderly couples changed course. The trio strolled through the pedestrian area without a hint of awareness or care for those around them, spreading out like a stain across the path. Gina, tote now heavy with produce, slowed her steps. Her instincts whispered, "Wait, don't engage. Let them move on." But they didn't move. The tattooed one lit a cigarette under a no-smoking sign and leaned on a stranger's hood, like it was his living room. "Excuse me," Gina said gently, her voice barely rising above their laughter. "May I pass through?" The leader turned slowly, as if her words took effort to process. His eyes, hidden behind lenses, raked her up and down. "What was that, Grandma?" he asked, dragging the word out like a taunt. "You in a rush or something?" Gina flushed but kept her composure. "I just need to get by if you don't mind." "Oh, but I do," he sneered, exhaling a thick cloud of smoke in her direction. "We're having a conversation here." What happened to kindness, she thought, The world hadn't always been like this. She dipped her head and moved sideways to avoid confrontation. "I'm sorry to bother you." But as she passed, her bag brushed the man's sleeve. That's all it took. He jerked his arm back like she'd poured acid on it. "Oh, watch it, lady. This shirt cost $200. Gina's apology came fast. "I didn't mean," the muscular one snorted. Maybe she needs glasses." "Or a walker," the sneering one added. One apple slipped from Gina's bag. Perfectly round, perfectly red. It rolled across the pavement and landed near the tattooed man's feet. He looked down, then up. A slow, cruel smile crept onto his face. And instead of ignoring it or handing it back, he lifted his foot. The boot came down hard on the apple. It shot across the pavement, spinning wildly until it vanished beneath a parked car. "Oops," the tattooed man said with mock innocence, his companions laughing on cue. "Well, maybe tie your bag better next time, huh?" Across the lot, Chuck Norris didn't flinch, but his hand clenched around his coffee cup until the paper crumpled with a soft crunch. Something behind his eyes shifted. An internal switch, flipping. The tattooed punk stepped closer to Gina, his frame looming over her 5-foot figure. His cologne hit her first, sharp synthetic laced with cigarette smoke. It made her stomach turn. "What else you got in that bag, Grandma?" He sneered, reaching for the canvas tote. His fingers hooked the edge and gave it a tug. Please don't," Gina said, her voice firm but calm, instinctively holding on tighter. He pulled harder. The strap twisted around her ring finger, biting into her skin. For a moment, it became a silent tug of war, his grip cruel and careless, hers steady, unyielding. "Let go, lady," he growled, frustration cracking through the performance. The strap cut deeper. Her wedding band pressed into her finger, turning a lifetime of love into a flash of pain. 50 years with Chuck, symbolized by that thin circle of gold, now a point of resistance. Something ignited inside her. Not fear, not panic. Something righteous. "That's my property," she said, her voice clearer than she expected. Time slowed. She noticed the boy peeking out from behind a nearby car, eyes wide. An old man shook his head and walked away. A young woman, barely out of college, raised her phone, camera lens pointed in their direction. With one final jerk, the man ripped the bag from her grip. The handle left a burning red mark on her finger, blood rising angrily to the surface. "Jesus, lady," he muttered, now holding the bag like it was a trophy. "Learn to take a hint." Apples spilled. Red and gold, they bounced across the pavement like marbles. Gina knelt to retrieve them, moving slowly, her dignity intact even in humiliation. She reached for a fallen golden delicious and felt it. A hand. On her shoulder, but not to help. It pushed, not hard, not headline-worthy, just enough pressure to tip her balance, just enough disrespect to cross a line that should never be crossed. The ground tilted beneath her. Her weight shifted. Her body obeyed physics. Palms slammed the asphalt first, stinging. Then her hip hit. A deeper pain bloomed. Her side followed, awkward and hard between two cars. It happened all at once, and in slow motion. The realization, the helpless momentum, the way her chin tucked instinctively, the moment she gave in to gravity. And then she sat on the cold, dirty pavement, surrounded by rolling produce. Gina Norris felt something she rarely did, helplessness, and beneath that, rage. Her cheeks flushed not from injury, but from humiliation. The crowd reacted like a dying engine. Some pretended not to see. Others glanced, then looked away. A few half-stepped toward her, but stopped, afraid to get involved. "Watch your step next time," the man called out, tossing her empty bag into her lap like garbage. His friends howled with laughter, one mimicking her fall with exaggerated, mocking movements. Across the lot, Chuck Norris placed his coffee cup on the hood of the car gently. Too gently. Anyone who truly knew him would have understood the gesture as a warning. His fingers lingered for half a second too long. His stillness was surgical, the calm before the storm. To the casual observer, he looked like any retiree at the market. Crisp white shirt, neatly pressed khakis, silver hair combed back, reading glasses hanging on a cord. But there was something in the way he moved. No hesitation, no wasted motion. Each step was exact, deliberate. The kind of walk that made the earth pay attention. He moved through the cars with the silent grace of a predator, not hurried, just inevitable. Shoppers glanced at him, then looked again. Something about him made their instincts whisper, "This one's different." The three young men didn't notice. They were too busy laughing. The tattooed one had his back turned, midway through another joke about old drivers, when he sensed it, the presence behind him. He turned, scowling. Chuck Norris stood just 3 feet away, hands relaxed at his sides, face unreadable. No anger, no fear, just "You're gonna pick that up?" Chuck said quietly, his voice calm but razor sharp. "And you're going to apologize, or are you going to keep pretending nobody saw what just happened?" The words hung in the air like smoke. A few shoppers froze. Conversations faded. The energy shifted. The temperature dropped. The tattooed man glanced him up and down, mentally checking boxes. Old, harmless, irrelevant, he smirked. "Mind your business, Grandpa," he said, turning his back again. Chuck didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, a fixed point in the chaos. Why does it always come to this? Why can't people just treat each other with basic decency? Flashes of memory crossed his mind. Teaching martial arts to kids, training soldiers, drilling the code of honor into every lesson. Avoid conflict whenever possible. But this was necessary. His wife, the gentlest soul he'd ever known, was sitting on the dirty pavement because 3 young men had never learned basic human decency. Chuck Norris took a single step forward. It wasn't aggression, it was decision. That step carried the weight of a lifetime of restraint, of knowing exactly when to act and when not to. A young woman holding a phone sensed the shift in the air. She raised it higher, camera rolling. One of the tattooed man's friends nudged him, gesturing toward Chuck. "It looks like Grandpa wants to play hero," he said, loud enough to echo. Chuck ignored them. He knelt beside Gina with movements smooth as flowing water, undiminished by age. One by one, he picked up the apples, placing each gently back into the worn canvas bag. His eyes met hers. A silent conversation passed between them. 2 people who'd spent 50 years together didn't need words. "Are you hurt?" "No, just my pride. This isn't over." "I know." He helped her up with calm efficiency, one hand steady under her elbow, the other brushing dirt from her sleeve. The tattooed man watched, his irritation growing. Being ignored wasn't part of his script. He felt control slipping. "Ha ha ha ha, I'm talking to you, old man," he snapped, voice sharper. Chuck slowly turned, placing himself between the man and his wife. "And I'm choosing not to listen," he said quietly. "But I'll give you one more chance to do the right thing." The man laughed, hard, fake, loud. His friends joined in, creating a chorus of mockery that bounced across the parking lot. "What are you? Her bodyguard or something?" He looked Chuck up and down with exaggerated flair. "Wrong day to play hero, old-timer." Chuck didn't respond. He didn't need to. Insults rolled off him like rain off oiled leather. He'd heard worse from men far more dangerous. His focus stayed on Gina, making sure she was steady. The world seemed to fold in on itself. Time blurred. Suddenly, he was 20 again, in fatigues under the Korean sun. A drill sergeant barking orders. Then in his 30s, stepping barefoot onto a tournament mat. His opponent twice his size, already off balance. Then 40, teaching hand-to-hand combat to elite special forces. Soldiers hanging on his every word, learning how to survive. These weren't memories. They were muscle memory. 50 years of discipline hadn't faded. It had distilled, made purer, sharper. The tattooed man, bolstered by laughter, stepped in closer, invading Chuck's space, the stink of cologne and stale cigarettes thick in the air. Come on, Pops," he goaded. "Don't you have some Metamucil to drink?" Chuck didn't blink. He simply turned, guiding Gina a few steps away, gently positioning her behind a parked sedan. His hands never rushed, never flinched, always aware. He pressed the keys into her palm. "Wait in the car," he murmured. She hesitated. It's okay," he said softly, his expression calm, the corner of his mouth twitching up in that signature, almost smile. "I won't do anything you wouldn't approve of." He meant it, because if there was one thing Chuck Norris had learned, it was this: patience isn't weakness. Restraint isn't fear. But the young man didn't understand restraint. He saw silence as surrender. He stepped in again, jabbing a finger against Chuck's chest. "Oh, don't touch me again, old man," he barked. Chuck hadn't touched him, not once, but the finger remained there, pressing harder now, 1 pound of pressure, then 2. Deliberate, threatening. Chuck looked down at the finger, then up into his eyes. In that instant, the world paused. 70 years on this earth, half a century mastering martial arts. He thought only a fool touches a master without permission. Time stretched, elastic and fragile. The tension in the air was so thick it crackled. The crowd had grown, silent still. Phones recording, a mother pulling her child behind her, an old man shaking his head, not in confusion, but knowing. Still, the finger stayed. Still, Chuck waited. "What are you going to do about it?" the young man taunted. Chuck didn't answer. He was evaluating, not the man's body, but his soul. Looking for something, a way out, a chance to end this without violence. He found none. "You haven't been in a fight in 15 years, Chuck said quietly. Please, don't make me remember how." The young man grabbed Chuck's shoulder. Hard. His fingers dug into the white cotton of Chuck's shirt, ready to shove him aside. Assert dominance the only way he knew how. "Oh, get out of my way," he growled and shoved. But Chuck wasn't there. He shifted, just slightly, like a leaf floating in a breeze. The shove missed, momentum carrying the man just enough off balance. And in that exact heartbeat, Chuck moved. Not with violence, not with force, with precision. His hand swept up, not in a punch, but a smooth, effortless hook, fingers catching the man's wrist just right. He applied pressure, barely a twist, just enough to pinch the radial nerve. The tattooed man's eyes snapped wide. A jolt of pain rippled through his arm, sharp, electric, real. The laughter stopped. The crowd leaned in. And for the first time all day, the young man didn't have anything to say. It wasn't pain. Not yet. It was something worse. Surprise. That electric moment when your body doesn't respond the way it's supposed to. When you try to move and something fundamental in the physics of the world is shifted. That's what the tattooed man felt. He tried to pull back, but his weight was wrong, too far forward. He was trying to push a door marked pull, and every ounce of force he applied worked against him. "What the—" he started, confusion unraveling confidence. Chuck released him instantly. No bravado. No threat, just a step back, hands neutral, face unreadable. But something in his eyes had changed. A lens had focused. The soft haze of patience had sharpened into something ancient and absolute. The tattooed man stumbled, catching himself. Disbelief twisted across his face. This wasn't how these things were supposed to go. People flinched. People cowered. They didn't move like shadows and leave him off balance, looking like a fool in front of a crowd. His 2 companions felt it too. That subtle shift in the air. The muscular one with the shaved head stepped in, close to Chuck's right. The lanky one flanked the left, forming a loose semicircle around him. A pack closing in on a threat they didn't yet understand. "You just made a big mistake, old man," the tattooed leader growled, pride leaking into every word. He gave a sharp nod toward the SUV. The lanky one jogged over, reached through an open window, and came back with something cold and gleaming in his grip. A collapsible baton. Snap! It extended with a metallic hiss, mean and final. The crowd shifted, a ripple of unease running through them. A man in a store apron stood at the edge of the parking lot, phone to his ear, watching, helpless. Maybe he was calling security. Maybe the police. Too late to stop what was coming. Maybe just in time to witness the fallout. Chuck Norris took it all in with surgical clarity. 3 opponents, 1 armed. Limited space between cars, bystanders across the lot. Gina, by their car, eyes locked on his, concern etched deep into her face. She hadn't gone inside. Of course she hadn't. In 50 years of marriage, when had Gina ever walked away from his side? The tattooed man started circling to Chuck's left. His ego demanded resolution. He'd been embarrassed, and people like him. They couldn't tolerate being embarrassed. He gestured behind Chuck. "Teach him a lesson," he snapped. The blow came from behind without warning. A sucker punch. All weight, all speed, all intent. It caught Chuck in the back of the head, smashing his temple into the sharp curve of a parked car's taillight. Crack! Pain detonated across his skull, bright and white and electric. The world tilted. Sound warped. Gasps came from the crowd, but they sounded underwater. His vision blurred. His legs faltered. Warm blood trickled down his cheek, thick and metallic in his mouth. He tasted copper. He tasted time. Too old for this, a thought whispered, unbidden. He braced himself on the car, shoulders sagging. Blood soaked into the collar of his shirt, the white shirt Gina had given him for his 70th birthday just last month. "You look so handsome in white," she'd said, laughing softly. Now that shirt bloomed with crimson, a slow, blooming stain. And that, oddly enough, was what brought him back. Not the pain, not the blood. The shirt. The idea of explaining to Gina why her gift was ruined, that somehow made everything clear. His hand went to his collar. Fingers came back stained red. He looked at the blood calmly. Curiously, like it wasn't his. Behind him, laughter rang out again, louder now. They thought they'd won. Chuck straightened. His spine aligned. His breath slowed. His heart settled into a deeper rhythm. His body responded like an old engine. Well-maintained, lovingly tuned, ready when it mattered. Stance shifted. Subtle things. The width of his feet, the bend in his knees, the angle of his shoulders. Nothing obvious. But to those who understood violence, it was everything. Not for him. For Gina, no one puts my wife in the dirt and walks away thinking that's acceptable. The tattooed man came back into view, his grin wide at the sight of blood. "And not so tough now, are you, Pops?" Chuck didn't speak. His gaze had turned inward into the furnace, into that part of himself he hadn't touched in years, the part that had survived wars, tournaments, ambushes, assassins. He'd kept it locked away, but not forgotten. A change came over him, not theatrical, not loud, but deadly. His eyes, once warm with age and kindness, went glacial, still, silent, surgical. It wasn't serenity anymore. It was the calm before the storm. He wiped the blood from his temple with one sleeve. The gesture was slow, measured, almost ceremonial, like a samurai preparing for battle. In that moment, Chuck Norris crossed a threshold. The man selecting peaches with his wife at the farmer's market? Gone. In his place stood the man who had spent a lifetime mastering lethal control. The three young men sensed it. They didn't know what they were feeling, but their bodies did. A flicker passed through them, uncertainty, not fear, not yet, but the instinctual recognition of a predator. Still, pride screamed louder than instinct. They'd drawn blood. They had numbers. They were committed. The tattooed man gave a final nod. "I'll take him." And in that moment, they made the last mistake they would make that day. The tattooed leader moved first, confidence oozing from every pore like sweat in the heat of a bad decision. He stepped forward, bold and certain. His muscle-bound friend flanked him on the right, knuckles tightening. The lanky one with the baton crept to the left, his weapon twitching like a nervous thought. They moved like men used to getting what they wanted through presence alone, through numbers and threat, not talent. Chuck watched them approach, and the world slowed. Micro-expressions. The flex of a calf muscle, a shift in weight, a flicker in the eyes. To most, these were meaningless. To Chuck, they were data. 5 decades of training processed it in an instant, a human supercomputer dressed in bloodied cotton. At his feet lay Gina's canvas bag, 30 years of loyalty, stained now with dirt and his own blood. In one smooth, unassuming motion, Chuck bent and picked it up. No one reacted. Not yet. They hadn't registered the movement as tactical. They would. The tattooed man lunged, winding up a wild haymaker, aiming for the same temple he'd already split open. He wanted blood. He wanted dominance. He got apples. Chuck moved. The bag arced through the air like a hammer tossed by a forgotten god. Its contents, apples, bread, a jar of local honey, a wedge of sharp cheddar, added just enough weight. Thwack! The bag caught the leader square in the face. There was a sound like a melon hitting pavement. A Honeycrisp apple exploded against his cheek. He staggered backward, sunglasses flying, nose leaking bright red. The world hadn't caught up yet. The crowd gasped in fragments. Before the man could recover, Chuck turned, pivoting cleanly toward the muscular one already mid-swing. There was more control here. Boxing, maybe, but still too wild. Too eager. Chuck didn't block. He let the punch graze his shoulder, stepping in instead of back. He moved inside the swing, a small hip check barely noticeable. A shift in balance, A twist of pressure. Physics obeyed. The attacker's own momentum betrayed him. He pitched forward, face first into the hood of a nearby car. Crunch! A perfect dent shaped like his shame. The baton carrier froze. Something was wrong. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was a lesson, a memory he'd carry in his bones long after the bruises faded. Chuck turned to face him. There was no anger, no emotion, only assessment. You still want to use that? He asked softly, nodding toward the baton. The young man swallowed. His grip tightened. Pride told him to fight. Instinct screamed at him to run. Pride won. He swung. Desperation made the arc wide and clumsy. Chuck didn't dodge, didn't flinch. He simply smiled. A tiny, tired smile. And that was the moment. The attacker faltered. Just for a second. But a second was all Chuck needed. His hand shot out fast as thought, seizing the wrist holding the baton. Twist. Pressure. The nerves lit up. The baton hit the ground. The fingers were no longer his to command. Before the young man could react, Chuck flowed into motion. A classic shoulder throw, flawless. The lanky attacker lifted off the ground like he'd been scooped out of existence and slammed back into it. Wham! The breath left his lungs in a desperate wheeze. 7 seconds. That's how long it took. From the first swing to the last fall, 7 seconds. Chuck stood in the middle of the wreckage. His breath steady. His stance relaxed. Blood still streaked his temple, but his eyes were sharp, clear. And I was rather hoping to keep that streak going. The tattooed leader stirred, dazed and broken. Who the hell are you? He croaked, blood seeping between his fingers. Chuck straightened his collar with a wind. But just a husband, he said, voice quiet, but sharp as flint, who doesn't appreciate seeing his wife shoved to the ground. He turned. The moment snapped like a bone reset into place. He scanned the parking lot, spotted the fallen canvas bag, and walked toward it. The market had fallen utterly silent. No chatter, no bartering, no children laughing, just a stunned, collective hush. 3 young men lay scattered across the asphalt in varying degrees of defeat and existential crisis. The leader sat up slowly, blood dripping. The muscular one slid from the car hood, groaning. The lanky one just stared at the sky like it might offer him answers. Chuck reached the bag. He knelt. An apple here, a loaf of bread there, strawberries miraculously intact in their plastic container, each item placed back into the bag with a kind of gentle precision. As if this wasn't an aftermath, but a return to routine, because for Chuck, it was. Handling artifacts in a museum, that's what it looked like. The crowd remained frozen, as if bound by an unspoken spell. Phones still raised, mouths slightly ajar, not from shock alone, but from awe. They had just witnessed something impossible. Not flashy, not dramatic, surgical, like watching a master clockmaker adjust gears inside a grandfather clock. Only the gears were people, and the result was devastating. A teenager lowered his phone, hand trembling. "Did you see what he just did?" he whispered, voice barely above a breath. His friend nodded, eyes wide. That wasn't normal, and from the back of the crowd it came, the words that had been hovering unspoken, finally given breath. That's Chuck Norris. It was a name, but more than that, a revelation, a ripple in still water. Recognition dawned like the sunrise. Slow, warm, undeniable. He wasn't just a man defending his wife. He was a legend walking in plain sight. No one cheered. No one applauded. They knew better. This wasn't a movie moment. This was real, and real demanded respect. A silver-haired man murmured to his wife, "My instructor trained under him in the 70s. Said he was the real deal." Even then, a young mother pulled her child closer, not out of fear, but reverence. "That's what self-control looks like," she whispered. He did exactly what was needed. Nothing more. Chuck didn't acknowledge the murmurs, the reverence, or the stares. He just repacked the bag. Apples, strawberries, bread, a quiet act of restoration, undoing chaos with the same care he'd used to create. He winced as he stood, age reminding him that while skill remained, recovery wasn't what it used to be. Then, across the parking lot, his eyes found hers. Gina. She stood by the car, pride and concern written across every line of her beautiful, weathered face. Chuck walked to her, slow but steady. Bag swung at his side like a pendulum, marking the end of a moment. The crowd parted, not out of fear but instinct. You make room for a storm when it passes. As he reached her, she raised a hand, her fingers brushing the crusted blood at his temple. "You're hurt," she said softly. Chuck shrugged. "Just a scratch," but she knew better. Did you really need to do that?" she asked, not accusing. "Just curious." Chuck thought about it. The pain, the cost, the message. "No," he said, placing the bag in the back seat. "But sometimes a lesson's worth teaching." He glanced back. The three young men were still recovering, slower now, quieter. No one offered to help them. Actions have consequences. Chuck opened Gina's door, helping her in with the same care he'd shown for 40 years. "I'm sorry about the strawberries," he said. "And the shirt?" Gina touched his hand, her wedding ring glinting in the morning sun. "I can wash a shirt, Chuck," she said softly. "But I can't find another man like you." Something in his chest tightened. He squeezed her hand, gently, purposefully, then walked around to the driver's side. In the mirror, he saw himself, blood-streaked, shirt-stained, eyes calm. And behind him, the teenager already replaying the video for his friends. That video would be everywhere in a matter of hours. By nightfall, it would have millions of views. By tomorrow, news coverage, memes, talk shows. But Chuck didn't care. Fame had never been the point. The point sat beside him, buckled into the passenger seat with love in her eyes. "You know this'll be all over the internet by lunchtime," Gina said, already resigned to the virality. Chuck shrugged. "People need their entertainment." "You're more than that," she said. "You always have been." He looked at her, this woman who'd walked beside him through decades of life. "Maybe," he said, "but not to you. Never to you." The car rumbled to life. "Want to stop for those tomatoes?" Gina smiled. "I think we've had enough excitement for one morning." They drove away, hand in hand. Behind them, three men, a crowd in stunned silence, and a legend gone quiet once more. What the world saw was Chuck Norris, the icon. But in that car, he was just a husband, doing what needed to be done. Glowing star if you felt the power in this moment, if you admired the precision, the purpose, and the heart. Don't forget to hit that red like, speech balloon, drop a comment with your favorite part, mobile phone with arrow, and subscribe to see what Chuck might do next. Because legends, they don't fade. They don't fade. They just wait for when they're needed most.